Welcome back to the channel. It's your boy, Mr. GoodBuds. We back again with another podcast session. This is the discussion episode 2. We're gonna be talking about the basics to watering, or watering basics 101. But before we get started, first let's holler at Mars Hydro, man. A quick word from our sponsors. Yes, sir. Mars Hydro has everything you need to get you going. They got lights, they got tents, and they even got inline fans to help with that exhaust. We got bar style lights and we got quantum board style lights. Mars Hydro has everything that you need to get you going and have you a successful grow. Everything that they has the perfect amount of power, perfect amount of light penetration to the tent. Everything that you need to get you going, man. I'm telling you, make sure you holler at Mars Hydro. Go on Amazon and you can look at everything that they have, and they have a beautiful store on Amazon. And make sure when you go there, you use the code Mr. GoodBuds, and that's gonna give you a nice discount on everything that you want. Anything that's Mars Hydro, Mr. GoodBuds. Make sure you type that in, man. All right, so let's jump right into it. We're gonna be talking about water in this podcast second. In this second segment of the podcast, it's gonna be a quick segment. I wanted to make sure we talked about watering as well. Since we talked about feeding and how I feed the plants. Now this is a basics to watering, but this is this segment is geared more as to how you should water all your plants, because watering is pretty much the same. To deliver that water can be completely different, but the way that the amount of water and when you're giving the water to the plant is what we getting at. So, like I said, first we're going to talk about why is watering important. And basically, if you look it up, water acts as a vehicle for dissolved nutrients and minerals being absorbed through the roots before spreading through the rest of the plant. It also cools the plant down and fills up the cells to keep that plant structurally sound, and is required for photosynthesis. And what they mean by structurally sound is, when the plant is underwater, it will start to get droopy. It'll start to fall over and wilt. And when you give it that water, you'll see it turn back up and it'll get strong again. That's what it means by structurally sound. You even notice when you low stress train, and I've actually talked about on the channel before, with low stress training, and when the plant needed water, and when I didn't give it water while I was training it, those plants, those tops never turned back up towards that light, and they actually stayed droopy the entire time until it turned up towards the light. And when I gave it that water, it was when it turned up towards the light. So that's what it means by structurally sound, and also being a big part of photosynthesis. Now, also what's important in this segment, which is just as important, is oxygen. Now, we're not going to talk about how many million different ways that oxygen is needed, but oxygen is a very key factor in the plant. Oh, and I also didn't mention that water makes up 80% of a plant, of most plants. So it's going to be key that a plant is going to need water. Now, the oxygen is needed just as well, especially dissolved oxygen. Dissolved oxygen and water for roots help that plant stay strong, and help those roots grow strong and healthy. And without that oxygen, the water can cause those roots to rot, which can cause very detrimental and irreparable damage to a plant. So let's talk about how I water my plant. Now, I do a soilless or soilless living soil type of grow. It's not soil because it is peat moss and cocoa, and a lot of people do consider that soilless. But it's the same to me and you and I hand water. Now, we're not talking about, like I said, how we deliver the water. Now, you could be using a drip system, drip feed. You could be using an ebb and flow drain system, drain and fill system. But the same thing is going to apply. When you dripping those plants, that water is dripping. And what's important is that you're not giving your plants water when it is not needed. So what I mean by that, when I'm watering my plants, even though I go by a schedule and I like to water my plants at that day, I'll go and check that plant. Now, I can check it by picking the plant up and doing the weight test. If it is extremely light compared to how it is when I watered that plant, then I'll go ahead and water it. But it needs to be dry. If I lift it and it's still slightly heavy, it's not getting water. I'll stick my finger into that dirt about 1.5 inches deep, and if it's still wet, it is not getting water. That's what's very important. I will make sure that that plant is bone dry. Plants do not like being overwatered. In my experience, the plant will have more harm done by being overwatered than underwater. And so I make sure, and the plant stays very happy when it gets the least amount of water it needs, which is the most amount of water it needs. The thing about the water, and they take up nutrients when they need them. So I make sure, like, I gotta keep stressing this. No matter how you feed, even when you drip feed, the drip is not as often and it's not as much water. So by the time it drips again, that plant is dry and it is getting more water. It is important that you not overwatering that plant. Now let's get into the next thing. Let's talk about overwatering. I talk about overwatering before underwatering because overwatering is less important to me. Overwatering is easy. You know you overwatered your plant when you come into the grow room and the plant is completely droopy, is wilted, and you haven't watered that plant. Then you know it's probably overwatered. Now, overwatered plants and underwater plants look exactly the same, but a few key differences. When you underwater your plant, when you touch those leaves, they're going to be very dry. You're going to know it's underwater because the pot is dry. There is no water in that pot. The soil, the medium, is extremely dry to the touch. And that plant is wilting. Now you even notice with underwatering, if it goes too long, that those leaves will wilt so bad that they will start to turn brown and dry and burn because of the absence of water. So that's the key difference that you can tell with underwater. And like I said, you know you underwatered your plant because you ain't gave it no water and it's wilty as hell. Now the other way around, overwatering. Now it's a little bit harder to tell when you overwater your plants, which is why I stress to not to get confused is to wait until that plant is dry, because when you overwater your plant, it will start to get very confusing because it'll be hard to tell. Now the key sign to tell that you overwatered your plant is that you know you just goddamn watered it a few minutes ago or yesterday and it's droopy. Now the main way to tell is that you're gonna touch that soil just like you would do or do the weight test, and that soil is going to be extremely moist, or maybe not even extremely moist, because overwatering is a very, very fine line. You can overwater very easily. So if it's not completely dry, it's overwatered. If you feel those leaves, the biggest difference is those leaves. Now they'll be droopy, but not wilted. They'll be very, very moist and very wrinkly, like when you have your hands when you're in the bathtub and your fingers get all wrinkly from being in the tub for too long, from having too much water absorbed in your skin. It's the same way with the plants. The leaves get very droopy, and they get droopy from the weight of the excess water in the plant, and they will get very, very wrinkly. And that's overwater. Now the danger with overwatering, the difference with underwatering is underwater is easy to fix. You can give the plant some water, 15 minutes, boom. It'll flip its way back up, and it's healthy again. Underwatering, that plant, the roots is not getting oxygen at that point, so those roots can start to rot, which can cause a downward spiral for the plant altogether. The best way to fix that problem is to just not water that plant. Let it go ahead and dry out, and let it dry out completely. Like I keep saying, that's what you should be doing when you water the plant, and let that plant dry out, and it usually will be fine. If it hasn't been too long that it's been overwatered, it'll be fine. Let it dry out completely. It should be standing tall by then, and then go ahead and hit it with some more water. Now it will get confusing. Things do get confusing with under and overwatering when your plant is root bound. It'll get real hard to tell then, because the plant can be underwatered very easily because it drinks water very fast. You have to water it a lot. But the thing about root bound plants is when you water them, they can become overwatered very easily as well, because those roots are bound inside that pot, and it's already tangled and intertwined in a mess in that pot, and it's already hard to breathe. So when you water that plant, it can become overwatered very easily. So if you find yourself watering the plant and it's drying out and being moist and it's always droopy, it's probably because it's root bound. Some plants are finicky like that, and that's why I like to keep my watering at the minimum. All right, so let's talk about different pots. Now there are ways that you can virtually not have to worry about underwatering, overwatering a plant, and that is by pots. Now, basically, if you can keep dissolved oxygen at your plant's roots indefinitely, then you don't have to worry about overwatering, because that plant is going to uptake water only when it needs it. It will never be overwatered. It will never get droopy. It'll always have oxygen, and that's the thing, because those roots can breathe. Now, there's a few ways that you can achieve this, and one is through the pots that you use. Now, plastic pot, we're going to talk about plastic pots first. Plastic pots are the worst pots to use when it comes to watering, and that's because those not only do your roots chase water, but they also chase oxygen. And if the only oxygen that it can breathe is the topsoil and those holes at the bottom of that pot, then those roots are going to go down to those holes, and it will become very easy to overwater because it's not able to get oxygen throughout the rest of that pot through those side walls. And the only place it can get oxygen is through those bottom holes. When you water and that runoff fills up those holes, then that plant will start to become overwatered very fast and very easily. Which is why I try to stay away from plastic pots. They're cool when the plant is small and I don't water too much anyway. And if you're going with my what I just said about watering at a minimum and make sure that plant is dry, then you won't have too much issues with it. But a plastic pot doesn't allow those roots to breathe. Now, a different pot that you guys see me use on the channel are fabric pots. Now, fabric pots allow those roots to breathe. And another plus about a fabric pot is that those roots, because they chase oxygen as well, those roots grow in a fabric pot very evenly and spread out, and they take up all the space that's available to them inside those fabric pots. And it creates a very structured and breathable and untangled root ball. And the plant is a lot healthier when it has that type of root ball versus with a plastic pot and all the roots are growing straight down, straight to those holes. And another cool thing is those roots can grow through that fabric pot, but air and roots don't mix either. So when the air hits those roots, it pretty much acts as a pruning, and it prunes those roots, air prunes them, basically kills off those roots, and it keeps them directly underneath the wall of that fabric pot all around. So it's always getting oxygen at all times. So it's extremely hard to overwater the plants in those fabric pots. Now, yes, I have done it. It is very possible. When you oversaturate that dirt and it doesn't have a great drainage, that's something else I didn't talk about with the soil and drainage. You want to have a decent amount of drainage, and basically that allows that water to drain out of that soil in a decent amount of time so that that plant can get oxygen again. Now, I use soil with decent drainage, and I use a pot that allows breathing through the sides of the pot for the fabric pots. If you're using soil with no perlite, like an actual soil, it will hold on to water for a very long time. And in fabric pots, even though it's in a fabric pot, it will suffocate those roots and you will overwater. Now, if you're using like a cocoa is faster drainage, which is better. And then the amount of perlite that you have inside that soil or that cocoa, which allows for more drainage, is also even better. So all those things make a difference. And the last pot we'll talk about are those freaky looking, alien looking pots called air pots. It's when they have those bulges all around, and then the holes that's kind of recessed in between those bulges. Now, those bulges are meant to allow that dirt to stay, on those sides and hold water and dirt, and still allow that air to get into those holes, so that oxygen can get to those roots. Same principle, same thing as the fabric pots. The reason I haven't used them is because they look kind of hard to transplant. So I haven't used them. But comment down below if anybody uses those air pots, and let me know how you like those air pots, and is it hard to transplant them or not. But the same principle, they allow for air to get to those roots, so virtually makes it very hard for you to overwater those plants. Now, the last thing we're gonna talk about is hydroponics and why it's impossible. Why the plants don't get overwatered in hydroponics. Now, remember, this is basics. This is the basics. So there's probably a lot of experts that already know why. But there's a lot of beginners watching this right now, just like me, who's asking the question, how the hell does hydroponics work if the roots are completely submerged in water? Deep water culture, DWC, they're submerged in water the entire time of the life of the plant. That is because they use air stones to aerate that water to constantly dissolve oxygen into that water 24/7. Now, when you got 24/7 water and 24/7 oxygen dissolved in that water, that actually causes an explosion of growth. Those plants in hydroponics and deep water culture grow 2 to 3 times faster than they do in dirt or soilless mixtures, mediums. And that is because that dissolved oxygen is strengthening those roots, allowing them to pull in that oxygen when they need. And those roots get strong, allowing them to pull in nutrients when they want it, allowing them to drink water whenever they want it, and the plant is completely self-sufficient. Off subject, the only reason I don't use hydroponics is because I don't like the idea of the automated system failing on me. And coming back to my plants all being dead. That scares the hell out of me, so I don't use hydroponics. But other than that, the plant is completely self-sufficient. You kind of don't have to do anything. The plant will take up those nutrients. You do have to feed the nutrients, but the plant will take up those nutrients. They will breathe in that oxygen, and it will drink up that water whenever it needs it. But that's pretty much it. Like I said, I wanted to get the watering thing out of the way since we already talked about feeding, because watering is just important, if not more important, than the feeding. Once again, nobody joined us. I'm going to try and get this podcast done at the same time every week. Not every week, but every month on the same day at the same time, so we can have people join us. As you see, nobody joined us once again. But at this time, y'all could chat with them and have conversation. Or you can also ask questions right here. I did change the names to those channels in Discord, so now it's called the Discussion Topics and the Discussion Live. I hadn't even named the podcast until after I made those Discord channels. So appreciate y'all for joining me once again. Make sure y'all comment down below, like and sub. Also, you can check this podcast out on anywhere you receive your podcast. Anywhere. I'm on iHeartRadio. I'm on Apple Apple Podcast. We on Pandora. We everywhere, man. Wherever y'all watch y'all podcasts, go ahead and type in Mr. GoodBuds, the discussion, and follow me on there. And I'm on keep up. It's always gonna be posted on the podcast platform as well as on YouTube after it's posted on YouTube. So appreciate y'all, man. I appreciate all the love that y'all showed from the last podcast. And we gonna keep these joints coming. Like I said, make sure y'all comment down below, y'all like and sub. Mr. GoodBuds, we out.